You bet. Casinos are getting back to business. You might not want to bet about Major League Baseball and the leaders of the Players Union getting a deal anytime soon. And NASCAR Darlington doubles down on the opening week of the restart. Hello and welcome to Double AI. That's Andrew and Ari and Artificial Intelligence. That's the name of the podcast about sports and gaming analytics. I'm Phil Van Horn. Welcome to our second podcast. Say hi to Andrew Engel down in San Diego. Hello, Andrew.
Hey, Phil.
That was not as quick as last week. Last week's was a super quick hello.
I'm sorry, Phil. I'll work on it next week.
You didn't let me down. And Ari Kaplan joins us from Chicago. Hey, Ari. All righty. Well, guys, our second show really could not have better timing. There's plenty for us to talk about in the gaming and sports industries as we get into this entire pandemic restart. And Andrew, that leads us right into your sweet spot and where casinos stand right now as they launch back into this. And there's some pretty good information to share here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been interesting talking to people throughout the casino industry over the last week and watching because we're beginning to see casinos open up. So a handful of them have opened up already. Even more and many different states are looking to open up over the next week, and Vegas is beginning to talk about opening up. So it's a really interesting time, but it's going to be a really interesting experience for people when you're reading about it. They're turning off all but a couple of the slot machines and the slot machine banks. So they're going to enforce social distancing. We'll see how that goes. We'll see if there's a pent-up demand and people will rush back to the casinos, or if people are going to be leery to go into places like that where maybe it's a little difficult to maintain hygiene of the machines, of the chips, prevent cross-contamination. We'll see. Just yesterday here in Southern California, a number of the tribal casinos opened up and we saw people waiting in line to get in, people going in, even having some difficulty maintaining social distance. There was some enthusiasm out there. So maybe that's a promising sign for casinos. Maybe it's a concerning sign that we're going to see some problems from casinos.
Well, Andrew, those are some questions about casinos and people doing the right thing within social distance discipline, but there's no question about what's happening in the gaming industry. And if you take a look at what happened at Churchill Downs, they tweeted out, that's pretty some eye-popping numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I was just blown away that their opening day wager number was almost 3 times what they normally would see, right? They went from 5 million to almost 15 million just in their single day. So clearly there's a pent-up demand for sports wagering, right? And we kind of knew this. We were hearing stories about people gambling on all sorts of weird stuff, looking for wherever sports was still going on to try to bet during the last few months.
Well, let me jump in there because Pat Forty of Sports Illustrated tweeted out that not only was it $14.3 million, but remember, none of that was on site, not a dollar. Interesting. How about bringing us up to date on soccer in Europe, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bundesliga got its start. They played successfully in empty stadiums. I was curious going into it as to what it would look like. I do have to admit it's a weird experience watching the players not sit in those dugouts, but sit spaced 6 feet apart going down the sidelines. But promisingly for the English Premier League, it didn't look like there was any problems with the fans showing up outside of the stadiums. The fans were well behaved and didn't cause a problem. And despite the concern that a lot of people in Germany seemed to be suggesting that they weren't looking forward to sports returning, Sky Sports Germany reported eye-popping numbers again for viewership, doubled their typical Saturday viewership. I mean, even FS1 here in the United States had their largest ever rating for German football. So people are hungry for live sports.
And what does that mean for the Premier League or in Britain or the UK?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. The English Premier League has been worried about fan behavior and could they even host these games at the home stadiums, in part driving some of the concern by some of the lower level Premier League teams about whether it would be fair to them to make them play in neutral sites. Hopefully, this implies that the fans will behave and won't congregate. And perhaps the Premier League can play in the regularly scheduled stadiums. Um, so we'll see what happens there, but maybe it's promising. On the other hand, the Scottish Premiership, the top division of Scottish football, just declared their champion and said we're not going to conclude the season. So it's a really interesting time in sports in Europe.
Good update. Now, Ari, we turn to you, and you get to do some of the heavy lifting here. You get to sort out what Major League Baseball owners and the union leaders are up to right now. So have at it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot, and I'm an optimistic person, or positive at least, realist. But having the Bundesliga open is a positive sign. That number one, that the games can be played, and number two, that there is TV interest. So if teams are starting to negotiate with sponsorships or television revenue, that's a positive signal for a foundation that fans could come back. Of course, you have to do it in a safe environment, and that leads to we'll talk about Taiwan and other areas that are opening up. But right now, Major League Baseball, the Players Association, have a proposal out there to restart the season, a shortened season with all sorts of stipulations, designated hitter, expanded playoff teams from 10 to 14, and a lot of others. That the challenges are, how are they going to have fans at all? If they don't have fans, some documents were obtained or leaked that baseball will lose about $640,000 per game. So for each team, that's impacting a significant amount for an 82 game season if there are no fans. Some organizations have said it's 30% of their revenue coming from fan related, so that's tickets, food, merchandise, Uber, transportation, things of that nature. Some said it's as much as 70% of their annual revenue. So, the expectation is if they don't work out a deal by June 1st, so what is that, way less than 2 weeks, then they either have to have a shortened season or just call it off. And in preparation for that, a couple teams already started furloughing their front office staff, their minor league, player development. The Marlins, the Rays, the Angels are three teams that have announced if there are no games, June 1st is when the chopping block starts hitting.
Well, Ari, I want to challenge you on this, given your experience of working in a Major League Baseball front office. So let's take this set of playing information and say that that's relatively close. Let's call that 95%. And let's take this set of medical information and let's say that they're learning and taking a look at European soccer, and they're seeing that Taiwan's pro league is doubling from 1,000 to 2,000 people, and they're learning. And let's say that that's at 90%. But this financial set of information that the owners, commissioner, and Tony Clark, Rob Manfred have to agree on, I don't know that we're at 50% right there. Help me out on that. And that's one, give me a percentage of where we are right now analytically. And then two, I'm looking at June 15 because they're going to blow through June 1st regardless. So I want you to, one, give me a percentage and look at what is the last gas date for them to reach an agreement to get guys to practice for 2 to 3 weeks before starting on the 4th of July weekend.
Yeah, so that's one of the keys is, there's so many different keys and factors that you can't just say, all right, we're going to start and tomorrow everyone gears up and is ready to go. You know, these are humans, these are athletes. They need time to get back into shape. A lot of people are prepping right now, but you need that time, which is why spring training happens, is to get people starting to get in shape. Otherwise, you risk injury. So that's one. You know, the health concerns. Some players might be too afraid to play since it's their livelihood. It's not just potential death in 2 weeks. It's, you know, lungs collapsing in some marathon runners, you know, lung damage, which could affect them. So that's another. And then, you know, the big one you touched on is financial, that the owners are asking players to kind of change their contracts and do a revenue split, not necessarily allowing the player association or the players to get access to the financials. So it's kind of like, we'll pay you what we are saying is the fair amount, and we don't know what that is yet, but we control it. So that's not exactly sitting well with not just the association, but individual players. So that is a big hurdle to take.
Well, what's the last date they could agree on then that would give them time to go and practice and get ready for a season? What do you think? June 1st, June 10th, the 15th? What's your best guess from experience?
Yeah, and I've worked with player development and spring training, and you know, part of spring training is to decide who gets the major league club, but that whole parameters is very different. So if you assume you're not using spring training as a tryout, you're just your roster is already set, then you know, the most accelerated probably would be 2 weeks. 3 weeks would be comfortable. So that would put it like around June 10th. You know, questions of where they play it, facilities getting ready could be on fast track. So yeah, we're, you know, you have a very minuscule window to figure this all out. So the most ambitious, I would say June 15th. After that, just, you know, maybe redo it where it's a 60 game season, or just don't do it at all.
And Andrew, let's pick up on what Ari touched on analytically. And there's a gaming industry out there waiting for this. How will athletes perform? How can we predict? And how much data drift will there be? How do you look at that, Andrew?
This is the thing that has me the most concerned about, from a sports betting perspective, about predicting what's going on, even some of the analytics effort the teams themselves are doing to make better decisions, because there's going to be so much different from everything we've seen up till now. You know, starting with the English Premier League and kind of touching on what Ari said about spring training, there was an article posted, I think in the BBC today, where the director of performance for one of the lower teams in the Premier League was talking about, he has players who've been trapped in their flat for this entire shutdown period with no real exercise equipment. He doesn't know how he's going to get them ready to go in a short period of time. So that's one challenge. But there's other questions about how do people perform in empty stadiums, right? This is really rare. We have the famous Baltimore Oriole game from a handful of years ago, but how are players going to handle this on an ongoing basis? We know LeBron's already gone back and forth about whether he thought that was a good idea for the NBA. I just have to imagine empty arenas are going to mess up the shooting backdrop for these players. They're going to see it. How is that going to affect them? But I also just wonder, you know, if I'm looking at English Premier League, and, you know, the big question is not whether or not Liverpool wins, but by how much is Liverpool going to win at this point? They're on pace to contend with the record for most points ever in the English Premier League. Can they? How does it change now that injuries have healed, both for them and for the other teams? What new injuries happened in the Bundesliga? There were several people scratched because they hurt themselves preparing Saturday before the game, maybe just by a fluke, but maybe because they hadn't had the chance to push themselves that hard. Yeah, there's just lots of openings. We're going to have to be really flexible. A lot of the things that we build from analytic models may not work. We're just going to have to be open to that and watch and adapt quickly.
Ari, from what you've heard around the industry, how are executive teams preparing to have a 2 to 3 week practice and then play a season? The teams that want to compete and that are not on a down cycle or tanking, how do they do that?
Yeah, well, it's the good teams. It's about communication and involving athletic trainers, nutritionists, making sure they're eating right, sleeping well. Um, some are okay with clean facilities for players to work out or have some equipment in their house. You have these technologies like Rapsodo, Blast Motion, where you can collect information from your home as a professional, or a non-professional, but in this case professional athlete, and have analysts start looking at videos of swing and pitching and command, and get remote type of instruction. And others, there are like private gyms and trainers where they're fairly safely more one-on-one type of behavior, being able to train. It's unprecedented to see anything like this. That's the individual, but a lot of baseball is teamwork. How do you get pitchers and catchers to coordinate? How do you set up your game strategy and communicate that? So those are some things that you at least discuss and talk about now, and just realize sometimes you have to just throw up your hands and say, here's what we do control now, and once the go signal is, here's what we'll need to rapidly do.
Well, guys, that's one thought about baseball. I want to bring up another one. Sports Illustrated running a piece, and we're recording our podcast on a Tuesday. They released a piece today, literally on the carnage of what's ahead for minor league baseball. And we know for college baseball, Division I college baseball, they've already dropped 2 programs at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, and Bowling Green in Ohio. 2 Division I baseball programs are dropped because of finances. But minor league baseball has a chance to be gutted or completely reshaped. And Ari, because you've been an executive in the industry, when you hear that dire forecast, what's your first primary thought?
Just the survival of minor league baseball long term. My first thought is that these aren't just baseball teams; they are part of a community, minor league. It's in fact, the Altoona Curve, one of their executives, said in that article that this is not just a baseball game for the families that come here. This is a getaway. It's a gathering space. It's a way for communities to come together. And what people don't always realize is that a lot of these baseball minor league communities are quite old. The Buffalo Bisons, founded in 1877. That was before I was born. Chattanooga Lookouts, where I first saw Tim Wakefield throw a knuckleball, founded in 1885. But yeah, it's been a contraction of about 42 teams before this pandemic, but they're in a limbo, or might we say purgatory. By the time COVID is over, the owner of the Tin Caps, another minor league team, Jason Fryer, said that they think 18 months is what they're looking at without significant revenue. So that's purgatory right now.
Well, guys, we could safely say, and for my 30 or 40 years in the business, I think this disruption from big leagues, minor leagues, D1 baseball, D2, D3, NAIA, all the way down, I think it impacts the entire baseball industry, all the way down to juniors in high school, who about 2 years out will see some form or any form of return to normal, but there'll be different rules. Andrew, I want to move forward in our last couple of minutes here. NASCAR restarted, and boy, the TV viewers were there waiting for them. 6.3 million viewers, which may or may not sound like a lot, but clearly it was the most watched NASCAR race in 2 years, other than the Daytona 500, which is their big Super Bowl event. And the top 5 markets had tremendous viewership, nearly 10% or nearly a 10 in places like Greensboro, Charlotte, Indianapolis, which are obvious racing mecca locations. But there was dramatic viewership increases in places like LA and San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia, which really had to light up a lot of executives' eyes. And the next NASCAR race, they're doubling up again. It's tomorrow night as we sit here on Tuesday. It's on Wednesday night. So that's really made for TV NASCAR viewing over the next couple of weeks. And then, guys, the Pro Bull Riding Series, they're preparing to compete with people in the stands, and they're looking at the first week of July, or sorry, second week of July, July 10, 11, and 12 in South Dakota with fans, but they're going to gauge that at about 35% capacity with distancing discipline in there. Now, Andrew, you hear those things. Tremendous TV audience. There was big take, a lot of gambling on the NASCAR races. You hear that, and your first thought has to be, this has got to be resonating with all the other sports, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We saw the posting from 538 last week where they commissioned the poll on when people would be ready for sports to return, and it was a very strong not yet. And then people said that, and then you see what happened in Bundesliga, what happened with NASCAR. People are clearly looking for entertainment. So yeah, every single one of the sports leagues has to be looking at that and saying, how can we get a piece of that action? And how does that change the economics? Ari was talking about the economics in baseball, which is for many of these driven by fans in the stands. But with much higher ratings, are people going to want a different revenue share with the networks, or more revenue, more sponsorship to try to take advantage of that? At the same time, I can't say I'm surprised, because we've seen the nature of the entertainment industry. Live events are one of the few things that consistently draws people to cable television right now. It just accelerated much faster with what we just saw in NASCAR. It'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. Wednesday isn't a traditional television night. It's not. So how does that behave? And then what happens in the next time they race on the weekend? I assume it's coming up in the next weekend as well. They're working through this pretty quickly. The only thing I would caution is, do they oversaturate, right? I mean, how much of this is pent up? How much of this is people will watch on a continuing basis? And how much 2 weeks from now does it go back to the way it was before?
I'm going to add one more question to that as we get close to closing. Ari, how much are Major League Baseball executives paying attention to what's happening right now with NASCAR and the business of NASCAR and NASCAR TV?
Yeah, I think they're paying a lot of attention, since this will reflect on how much revenue they might expect, but also sponsorships. There's a lot of churn, and if you come back to a sponsor and say we have no games and no basis for fans coming in, give us 10%, we'll give you a 10% discount, that won't fly. But if they see NASCAR, the attendance is back up, this is the viewership has been through the roof, the viewership of the Bundesliga is some of the best ever, then they can say, we'll give you a 10% discount for risk. So yeah, they're looking at it from a potential revenue negotiating standpoint very closely.
Well, guys, that'll wrap up our second podcast. The name of the program is Double AI. That's for Andrew and Ari and artificial intelligence. Ari, thank you very much. It's good to catch up again this week. Andrew, thank you as well.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
I'm Phil Van Horn. That's week number 2 on Double AI podcast on analytics in gaming and sports. We'll talk to you again next week.